Record. Thank you. Okay. So welcome to all of our IB friends. It's Elisa and Mr. S here again on this lovely July 13th. And we are talking about adaptations and habitats. All right. And then here are a bunch of vocabulary words. Again, it says SL and HL content up in the corner, but this is all SL. And
Mhm.
as you're looking over this list of vocab, any words here you're unfamiliar with? Any terms?
Um, Zero fight
Sure. Yep.
and are prop roots and aerial roots like what their roots look like, whether they're above ground or below ground?
Yeah. So we'll get into that. Those are some specific adaptations of zero fights, which are
Mhm.
these weird kind of plants. And the IB mostly just uses zero fights as an example of how a particular organism can adapt to a
Mhm.
habitat. And some of the adaptations that zero fights have that make them so successful in places where there's not a lot of water. It's basically what a
Mhm.
zero fight is. It's like a
Mhm.
cactus. Yeah, so there's a couple weird words in here, but once we talk about them, I don't think
Yeah.
you'll find it too confusing. And then I believe there's a little bit more vocabulary. So I'm sure you know what like grasslands and some of the biomes are hot deserts, taiga, tundra. But then we've also got some more adaptations of xerophytes, and that's pretty much all these other words refer to, are just
Okay.
specific adaptations. All right, so here is our first assessment statement out of the eight. It is B4.1.1, habitat as the place in which a community, species, population, or organism um, lives. And there's a lot of vocab just in that assessment statement. Do you know what a community is?
A group of organisms living in the same area.
Yeah, that's close. That's close. Maybe we should have started with what a population is. And so if you've got a group of the same species living in the same area and they're reproductively active, they would be considered a population. And so if you've got like a herd of cows, and they all kind of are on the same farm, that would be a population of cows. If you've got, a group of squirrels all kind of living in your neighborhood, that would be a population of squirrels. You could consider your grass on your front lawn to be a population of grass. So it's just the same species in the same area, and more often than not, they tend to be reproducing with one another. And then if you've got a bunch of different populations in the same area, so you've got plants, you've got some animals, you've got some fungi, together that's a community. So it sounds a little bit like an ecosystem, but an ecosystem also takes into consideration abiotic factors, so stuff that's not alive, like the climate, temperature, precipitation, soil. Um, and so communities are just the biotic factors, just the living things. We talked last year about what a species is. Do you remember the definition for a species?
Um, the same, not exactly.
Okay. It's two organisms, right, that can reproduce, and that's not enough. But their babies are fertile, so their babies can have babies.
Mm.
And that's what a species is. So every once in a while, species that are kind of closely related will get together, but typically their offspring is infertile. So in that case, it'd be a hybrid, like a donkey. If you get a mule and
Mm.
a horse together, that's a donkey. Or is it a horse and a mule is a donkey? I think it's a horse and a donkey. Um, or like ligers and tigons and all that good stuff.
Mhm.
All right. And this all falls under the study of ecology. And the technical IB definition for ecology is the branch of biology that deals with relationships between organisms and then their environments. Eco is Greek for house, and ology is the study of, and I think that's Latin maybe. So it's the study of organisms and their environments. Do. And organisms are just that single life form. So if we kind of put it in order, it'd go like organisms and then population, communities, ecosystems, biomes, and then the top of the like the top level is a biosphere. So like the Earth in its totality is considered biosphere.
Mm.
Okay. All right, so we kind of talked about this, but maybe we'll just watch this quick little video that goes over these terms one more time just for giggles. I think this guy's Irish, so that might be fun to listen to.
The key thing to understand in ecology is that all organisms have relationships. For example, mice have relationships with other mice, with the plants that they eat, with the predators that eat them, and with all of the other animals that live nearby. They also have relationships with the environment itself. For example, they'll breathe in oxygen from the air and breathe out carbon dioxide, or they'll burrow holes in the soil, which can increase irrigation and so improve the quality of that soil. Because of all these relationships, if any one part of the ecosystem changes, for example, the mouse population falls, it can affect all other parts of the ecosystem. So in this case, it could mean that predators have less food and soil quality decreases. Before we go any further, it's worth running through some of the special terms that you need to know for ecology. The first is habitat, which is just the place where an organism lives. So for our mice, that could be a field, a forest, or somebody's basement. Meanwhile, a population is all of the organisms of a particular species that live in that habitat. So all the mice that live in the field. Next, we have the community, which is all the populations of different species that live together in a habitat. So the community would involve not only the mice, but also the owls, the plants, and any other organisms that live in that field. Two more terms are biotic factors, which are the living factors of the environment, like the availability of food or the number of predators, and abiotic factors, which are the non-living factors of the environment, like temperature and soil pH. We'll take a closer look at these two in our next video, as they're both a bit harder to understand. If we put all of these together, so the habitat, the community that lives there, and all of the biotic and abiotic factors, what we have overall is the ecosystem, which we could describe as the interaction of a community of living organisms with the non-living parts of their environment. And ecology is really about understanding how these ecosystems function, and also how they might change in the future.
All right. Is that making sense? This would probably be good for flashcards, like if you just wanted to remember
Okay.
these terms.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, pretty straightforward. All right. No, we're not gonna watch you again. Um, and so just a few more notes. Again, within an ecosystem. So ecosystems can, range for square miles, square kilometers, but just that specific kind of area where you find a particular organism is considered to be its habitat. And so different organisms, depending on their needs, have obviously different sized habitats. And so you have a tiger, right, who's constantly moving, and their habitat might stretch hundreds and hundreds of kilometers versus maybe a field mouse whose habitat might, just be hundreds of meters. So it varies wildly depending on the organism in question. And so the coral reef, which sadly aren't going to be around much longer, there's thousands and thousands of habitats within that coral reef that are specific to different species of fish and coral and anemones and you name it.
Mhm.
When we think about habitats, we typically describe them in a couple of different ways. Their geographical location. And then also within that geographical location, typically their physical location. So are they up high? Are they down low? Are they associated with water? Are are they, associated with a particular type of rock? Are they underground? And then last but not least, if we can identify specifically or if we have a name for the ecosystem, that's also really helpful in describing habitats as well. Is it a grassland? Is it, part of a rainforest? Is it the shore of a lake?
Wait, sorry, can you go back to that side?
100%. If I'm ever going too fast, just let me know.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. How's the weather in Massachusetts today? Nice?
Good. It's pretty hazy, but
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
yeah.
Here as well, evidently that's all wildfire smoke.
Oh wow.
Yeah, was it earlier in the week? Was it kind of overcast and a little rainy?
Yeah, it was really foggy
Yeah,
and really
weird.
rainy.
Yeah, so the weather guy last night said that that all moved off, and then as soon as it moved away, all of the smoke came down from Canada, and it's going to be here till at least in the Midwest until tomorrow afternoon. But it's
Oh wow.
bonkers.
Yeah,
We
that
have
is,
a lot of fires.
gosh, that's so bad.
Yeah. Um, you did a great job earlier of just reminding yourself what a species was. And here are some beautiful swans, just like you see on the shore of Lake Lugano. And they would be considered a species, right? Because they can produce, I think, cygnets. I want to say cygnets or baby swans. And those cygnets can grow up to be swans one day and hopefully have cygnets of their own.
Mhm.
And then again, if we have a whole bunch of the same species living together in the same area and then actively reproducing with one another, that would be considered a population. And so it isn't as if every zebra in Africa is part of a population. There's probably thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe, I don't know, of herds of different zebras. And those zebras are made up of family groups and maybe some males, kind of go from one herd to another to increase genetic diversity. But that group will pretty much stick together and be considered a population.
Mhm.
No, there's considered to be, I didn't know there's a million zebras on the African savanna.
Oh
Crazy.
wow.
But again, I mean, they lump all of these zebras into one big population, the plain zebras, but I think technically there are lots and lots of individualized populations. It's not as if they're all breeding together. They're probably in localized little herds. And then we also chatted a little bit about communities again. Um, and that's just every living thing. And there's lots of different ways that these communities can interact. I'm confident you've heard of just the classic interaction of predator and prey. That's a pretty self-explanatory relationship. But
Mhm.
herbivory, do you know what that is?
Um, Competing over like plants or
Yeah, yeah. So if you're a vegetarian, you're not like you're still a predator. It's kind of weird
right.
to think of, but instead of going after animals, you're going after like carrots and stuff. So herbivory is actually considered to be a form of predation because it's one organism that's ingesting another organism, and that's bad news for the organism that's being ingested and great news for the organism that's doing the eating. And so it's considered to be a plus minus relationship. One individual is benefiting, the other individual is not. Um,
Mhm.
there's also competition. And so competition can happen within a species. And I think that's called, what is that? I always get these confused. Intra-specific competition. So, for example, when males compete, to see who gets to reproduce with a female, like deer when they rut and they come
Mhm.
together and they clash their horns. That's competition. But then there's also competition between different species, between different species. Uh,
Extra.
I think that's, I want to say that's that one might be intra specific, and inter is within. Uh,
Hmm.
and that's like gray squirrels and red squirrels. Um, Gray squirrels and red squirrels both compete for the similar food, but gray squirrels are much bigger and much more aggressive. And so that's actually a negative for both of those species because instead of thinking about like, oh, who am I going to reproduce with or who am I going to mate with or whatever, they spend a lot more energy worrying about the other type of squirrel. And so it's considered to be a minus minus because both of those species are exerting energy they could put into looking for food or looking for a mate, and they're putting it into worrying about the other species. And so what ultimately happens is something called competitive exclusion. So one of those two species is either going to have to find a new place to live or a new job within the ecosystem it's currently in, or it's going to go extinct. And then what else we got? Mutualism is a good one. Mutualism is like a plus plus, so like flowers and bees. That's a plus plus
Hmm.
relationship. Or you and your dog. I don't know if you have a dog, but or a cat. And then last but not least is parasitism. And parasitism is another plus minus. And so one species benefits and the other one does not, but it doesn't immediately kill the species that's not benefiting. And so if you have a wood tick on you, if you get bit by a mosquito, if you have a tapeworm, that's all considered to be parasitism. All right. Oh, and then the classic one from Finding Nemo, the clownfish and the anemone. And that's I think that's mutualistic. I forget what the clownfish do for the anemones, but the anemones definitely protect the clownfish. And then, as we mentioned before, if you put all the community and then you take into consideration all the abiotic factors, um, so like precipitation, soil quality, temperature, the types of rocks you find there, anything that's not considered living but still in that area, that's an ecosystem. And so I think we hit air, minerals in the soil, light, climate. Am I going too fast? We still doing okay?
Oh no, yeah, we could.
All right. And that concludes our first assessment statement. So pretty straightforward stuff. And so with B4.1.2, we're going to start to get into to adaptations. So we have this established ecosystem, we have these established communities, and ultimately what's going to help certain members of those populations find success because an ecosystem isn't a static thing, it changes. Sometimes there's more resources available, sometimes there's less resources available. And so that's going to create a struggle for existence. And so what happens or what variations can arise that might be beneficial to certain organisms that are going to help them to adapt and evolve. Um, and this is where we're going to start to see zero fights. So we're going to talk a lot about this through the context of plants. And two examples of plants that are going to be cited in this particular assessment statement are marram grass, and they're a zero fight, and then mangroves, which are considered to be a haliophyte. And a haliophyte is a plant that lives in really, really salty conditions. Have you ever seen a mangrove before?
I don't know. I don't think so.
There's lots and lots of mangroves in Florida. Um,
Mhm.
Really anywhere there's like an ocean or a sea and then it transitions into like a river or a lake, like when there's a transition between fresh and salt water, you tend to find mangroves. And mangroves are able to use salt water and get rid of the salt and just utilize the water for photosynthesis. So it's a pretty
Interesting.
cool adaptation. All right. So here's Marram grass. I bet you see this a lot around you, like when you go to the beach.
Yes.
Maybe there's sand dunes near you. Marram grass is really successful at establishing itself on sand dunes, and then it's super beneficial for the sand dunes because like then it helps to stabilize the sand, and over time, different organisms can then come and live in those dunes. So it's in a sense considered to be what's called a pioneer species. It's kind of one of the first species on the scene that helps to establish new habitats, new ecosystems. And they do this because they're really, really good at surviving with very, very little water. All right, we're gonna skip over this and let's talk a little bit about some adaptations that marram grass and really all xerophytes have that allow them to survive with very little water. And when you're thinking about this, just picture a cactus. Or sometimes at garden centers, there's a section of plants called succulents. And cacti and succulents are all xerophytes. It's just a different name for the same idea. Plants that don't need a lot of water or care. And so oftentimes when kids, move into the dorms or even to Tassus, maybe they want to get a plant for their room. And a really good option is always a cactus because you don't really have to take particularly good care of them and they're
Yeah.
likely to survive. All right. So one of the features that helps marram grass and a lot of xerophytes is they tend to have leaves, right? But their leaves are rolled into a tube. And this is kind of unique in that it's going to help to protect the stoma. And the stoma are these little holes on the bottom of a leaf that allow for gas exchange. So they allow
Mhm.
oxygen oxygen to leave and carbon dioxide to come in. But with marram grass, they roll their leaves into a tube, and then the xylem are inside, or the stomata are inside the leaves. And so this is going to cause the plants to not lose as much water because one of the factors that drags that moisture out of the leaf is called transpiration, and wind really contributes to transpiration. So by rolling itself into a leaf, they can slow down transpiration and not lose as much water. And then you find their little on just a regular leaf. If you pull any leaf off of a tree, you can actually look under a microscope and you see the stoma. But on marram grass, the stoma are deep, deep within these little pits. So they're like down at the bottom of a pit. And again, that prevents the wind from really accessing the stoma, and it doesn't transpire as much, doesn't evaporate as quickly. All right. They also have really, really thick wax on their leaves. So if you think of like a cactus, they're what you see as the cactus is actually its leaves. And that thick, thick, thick waxy layer prevents water from escaping. Most of the time, trees and plants and stuff, they have wax on the tops of their leaves, and that's not really about water escaping. That's as the rain falls, you just want to be able to protect the leaf and the leaf to like or the water to run off the leaf. But with marram grass, they're more concerned about losing water. Um, they've got super, super long roots because they obviously want to be able to access water deep, deep below the soil or the surface. But this also helps them to anchor and stabilize the soil and themselves because, as you know, the beach is very windy sometimes, and you don't want your marram grass flying away. All right. And they also have quite a few fibrous roots near the surface, so they want to be able to soak up and pool as much water as possible every time it rains, as quickly as possible. So they have the best of both worlds. They have deep, deep tap roots, and they also have fibrous roots. All right, so that was, let's see, one, two, that was five adaptations of marram grass. And the nice thing
Mhm.
about that is those are just like found in all xerophytes, so they're not specific to marram grass. So if you can, internalize or remember like three of those adaptations, like waxy cuticles, deep stomata, uh, deep roots. Those are present in almost um, all xerophytes. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about haliophytes. And so haliophytes again are organisms or plants that can filter fresh water and get the salt out of it. Um, and so let's watch a quick little vid here.
Mangroves are plants that grow in intertidal regions in coastal areas. An intertidal region is submerged with salt water during high tides and exposed to the air during low tides. Mangroves have a number of adaptations that allow them to survive in this ever-changing environment. The soil in which mangroves grow is soft and low in oxygen. To survive in such soil, many mangroves have stilt roots that prop up the plant and prevent the shoot system from being submerged during high tides. Plant cells, including those in mangrove roots, require oxygen. Normally, oxygen can be taken in through pockets of air in the soil. The soil where mangroves grow has little space for air and is very low in oxygen. To adapt to this low oxygen environment, some mangroves have specialized root structures called pneumatophores. These vertical structures stick up out of the soil and enable the mangrove root system to take up oxygen from the atmosphere. Another unique adaptation of mangroves can be seen in their life cycle. The seeds of many mangroves germinate and begin to grow while still attached to the parent plants. Once developed, the seedling falls away. The seedlings float and are dispersed to new places by the tidal flow of water. Mangroves are an important component of coastal ecosystems. Mangrove forests provide breeding and feeding grounds for a range of animals, including fish, crabs, birds, and some mammals. They also help to protect the coastline from erosion from waves, storm surges, and tsunamis. See you next time.
So as humans, ah, uh, so as humans, we really like mangroves because they also slow down hurricanes. So they mentioned tsunamis and whatnot, but they take some of the energy out of hurricanes before they fall on shore. So the more we get rid of mangroves, the more we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot because like they provide what's called an ecosystem service that when we remove it suddenly could cause billions of dollars in damage, and we're seeing that all over the world. Um, we'll skip this linked article in the interest of time, and then let's just talk a little bit more about some of the adaptations of haliophytes, or in this case mangroves. The video talked more about oxygen, but they also have some cool adaptations to deal with salt. So prop roots, they're going to help to stabilize the tree. I mean, when the tide's low, remember there's not a lot of soil there, and so it'd be really easy without these prop roots for these mangroves to kind of just tip over. And so that's going to really help to establish the structure of the tree and allow it to continue to grow up. And then their roots are shallow, so that when it is possible, when the tide's low, they can get in as much water and oxygen as possible. And then they've got these cool aerial roots that were mentioned in the video, and that's got nothing to do with salt, but rather just access to oxygen. And so when the tide is high, there's still a part of the root system that's kind of poking up like a snorkel, allowing allowing the tree to get in the oxygen it needs. Um, when people have plants, a lot of times they kill them, and the reason why they kill them is they overwater them. And what's happening when you overwater your plant is you're actually suffocating it. So if the roots are too saturated with water, the plant can't take in oxygen. So if you've got a house plant and you just like, you know, you're just pouring a liter of water in the house plant every day, um, the water or the root system is going to be just completely submerged in water, and it's not going to be able to access oxygen, and ultimately the plant's going to die. So that's kind of one of the problems with overwatering. What else we got? Okay, here's some stuff about salt filtration. So they've got specialized cells that help them to remove salt so they can still use the water. And then they talked in the video too about the seeds, how the seeds develop and mature on the parent plant, and then they drop into the water when they're ready to establish themselves, which is kind of cool. All right, we're moving right along. We are moving right along. How you doing? You need a break or anything?
No, no, it's okay.
Okay, in 2 minutes, I'm gonna have to kick you out and restart the video because my 45 minutes is up. Uh,
Right. Mhm.
but we'll keep rolling through these. So abiotic variables affecting species distribution. All right. All right, so this is called Shelford's Law of Tolerance. I'll let you look at this graph for a second before I yammer on. I think it's probably pretty gosh darn self-explanatory, but
Mhm.
okay, so according to the law, organisms have optimal survival rates for abiotic factors. And this makes sense, right? You and I, we have optimal factors. We refer to this as homeostasis, right? We want our temperature to be right there at 96.8 or 37 degrees. We want our pH to be 7. We only can really operate under certain pressure, certain atmospheric pressures. And you really can feel this if you go scuba diving, for example. We obviously need to eat and we need to drink water. We need to sustain a certain amount of hydration and calorie intake. And collectively, that's true of all living things. They have a optimal kind of range in which they can thrive. And this includes lots of abiotic factors, similar to you and I, like temperature and pressure and pH as well. And so obviously the environment isn't a fixed thing and conditions change all the time. And so we find that when the environment operates outside of that optimal condition, survival rates drop. And so too much or too little of a good thing can be problematic. And so we can divide this beautiful bell curve distribution, whatever you want to call it. We can divide it into kind of three categories. So there's the sweet spot, there's that optimal range, like right where we think organisms are going to do the best. And then on the outside of that are the zones of stress. So maybe organisms can do okay for a little while, but ultimately they're not going to do as well as they would if they were in that optimal range. And then on the very extremes, you've got the zone of intolerance. And that's what we want to avoid at all costs. Sad reality with climate change, though, is most of our ecosystems are undergoing some sort of zone of stress. So there very few ecosystems these days are actually in an optimum range.
Mhm.
And again, the different variables that make up that range of